It started with a shovel. Just one scoop of rich, dark earth peeled away from the back of my property under a warm spring sun. The kind of moment you don't usually remember, unless of course it's the moment that kicks off everything. I'd been planning the pond for years. Ever since I bought this piece of land, 3 acres on the edge of Willow Bend Reserve, I dreamed of it. Not a swimming pool, not a fountain. Just a small, self-sustaining pond stocked with koi, and maybe some catfish with lily pads and cattails, and the kind of silence that settles in when nature finally trusts you enough to exhale. I had the equipment, the know-how. I even checked county regulations to make sure I wasn't disturbing any protected wetlands or buried utilities. Everything was cleared, but I hadn't accounted for Karen. Her name was actually Karina Dupree, but in a cruel twist of suburban poetry, she lived up to every cliché her nickname implied. Shortcut platinum bob, mirrored sunglasses, and a clipboard always tucked under one arm like it was a law degree. She was the self-appointed compliance chair of our HOA, even though no one remembered ever voting for her. I hadn't seen her in weeks, not since the annual trash bin audit. Yes, that's a real thing here. But the minute she spotted me with a spade in my hand and a flagged outline in the backyard, she materialized like an angry prairie dog. "Excuse me," she called from behind the hedge, her voice sharp enough to peel paint. "What exactly are you doing back there?" I straightened slowly, resting both hands on the shovel. I hadn't even broken a sweat yet. "Digging," I said, flat but polite. She pushed through the gate like she owned it, clipboard already open. "I can see that," she said. "But why are you digging? And did you submit a modification request to the board?" I gestured toward the ground. "For a pond." Her eyes widened like I just announced plans to install a missile silo. "You're excavating. That's a major alteration to the landscape. That's not allowed without prior written approval." "It's on my property," I said calmly. "I'm not removing trees. I'm not redirecting drainage. The county's already signed off." Karen made a scoffing noise. "The county doesn't dictate neighborhood standards. That's what the HOA is for." I nodded. "Understood. But I've checked the bylaws, and there's nothing prohibiting small personal water features under 500 square feet." Her lips thinned. She flipped a few pages on the clipboard like it was a sacred text. "That's open to interpretation. Water features may invite mosquitoes. They may affect soil stability. They may decrease neighborhood harmony." "Harmony," I echoed. Karen stepped closer. "I'm going to need you to stop immediately. If you continue digging without board approval, you'll be cited." I took a long breath, looked out across my land. "My land." "Karen," I said slowly, "do you own this lot?" She blinked. "What?" "This land, this house, the soil I'm standing on." She hesitated. "No." "Then you're going to want to step back and take a breath before telling me what I can and can't do on it." Her eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" "No, ma'am. I'm telling you to go home." She stood there for a moment, as if waiting for lightning to strike me where I stood. When it didn't, she huffed, turned on her heel, and stormed off, but not before muttering, "You'll be hearing from the board." I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. The next morning, I was back at it, digging, marking off the edges, moving slowly and deliberately, savoring the work. I just started outlining the slope when I heard the sound of gravel crunching under tires. Not one car, 2. I turned, wiping sweat from my brow, and saw a black SUV and a dark blue pickup pulling into my drive like they had business to conduct. From the SUV stepped Karen again with her clipboard. But this time she wasn't alone. 2 men climbed out of the pickup. Both wore matching black shirts that said HOA Compliance Enforcement in block letters. They looked like mall cops who'd graduated from fantasy to farce, tactical boots, utility belts, even radios clipped to their shoulders. One of them had aviator sunglasses and chewed gum like it was his full-time job. Karen marched toward me like a general approaching the battlefield. "Mr. Langston," she called out, "you've ignored multiple verbal warnings. As of this morning, the HOA is formally intervening." I rested my shovel against the fence. "Intervening in what?" "Unauthorized excavation," she replied. "Failure to submit environmental assessment. Violation of Article 7, Section 3. Again, I said that section doesn't apply to water features under 500 square feet. "Interpretation rests with the board," she snapped. "And the board has decided your project is non-compliant." One of the compliance guys stepped forward, arms folded. "We're going to have to ask you to stop work and step away from the dig site." I stared at him. "Do you have a warrant?" He blinked. This isn't a criminal investigation. This is HOA business. Then you don't have jurisdiction on my property. Karen stepped in. Refusal to comply will result in additional fines and potential legal action. I raised both hands slowly, then pointed to my house. Karen, I've lived here for 10 years. I've paid every HOA due. I've kept my lawn trimmed, my fence painted, and my trash bins behind the gate. And in all that time, you've fined me twice for a flower box, and once for leaving holiday lights up past New Year's. Correct, she said proudly. But here's what you don't know, I said, my voice quieting. Karen tilted her head. What's that? I smiled. You're standing on land you don't own, in front of a man who not only owns this property, but also the office you hold your precious HOA meetings in. Her mouth fell open. I kept going. And while we're on the subject, how's your rent coming along? She blinked. What? You know that cozy little bungalow you rent on Aspen Ridge? The one with the arched windows and lemon tree in the back. She didn't respond. I leaned in slightly. I'm your landlord, Karen. Silence. The two compliance goons glanced at each other, visibly confused. So, if you want to keep your clipboard, your fake security team, and that roof over your head, I suggest you walk back to your car and reconsider how you want this to play out. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. I turned away, picked up my shovel, and drove it deep into the soil with one clean stroke. Right where the pond would go. Right where her power ended. For the rest of that day, I didn't hear a peep from Karen. Not a knock, not a note, not even an email with a freshly highlighted bylaw she'd conjured from her ever-growing handbook of imagined rules. She disappeared, leaving behind only the dust from her SUV's tires and the awkward memory of her two enforcers blinking in disbelief when I told them I owned the HOA building. I figured naively that her silence was surrender. I gave her too much credit. By sunrise the next morning, I was back in the backyard, boots in the damp soil, my shovel resting nearby as I mapped the trench line for the water inflow. The pond wasn't just a hobby, it was a dream. I'd drawn it on napkins for years, browsed irrigation catalogs, even toured other properties to study the slope and curve of a natural pond edge. It was going to be something beautiful, alive, sustaining. So naturally, someone had to try and ruin it. Around 10 a.m., I heard the familiar sound of the tires, but this time it wasn't the discreet hum of Karen's SUV. This time it was louder gravel spitting in every direction, an aggressive engine purring with entitlement. I looked up from the flag markers just as a third vehicle, an older black Suburban, rolled in behind the other two. The convoy had returned. Karen stepped out of the lead car dressed in a navy blazer, now as if the outfit might confer real authority. Behind her, the same two compliance enforcement officers got out this time, with matching clipboards and a more serious posture. But it was the driver of the Suburban that caught my attention. He was tall, late 40s, wearing a polo shirt with a gold HOA emblem embroidered on the chest and a radio on his hip. His sunglasses were mirrored, and his walk had the stiff arrogance of someone used to faking authority without getting called on it. Karen saw me staring and smiled like a predator who'd brought a bigger predator to dinner. This is Mr. Simmons, she announced, head of regional compliance. He's here to formally issue the HOA's cease and desist directive on your excavation project. Mr. Simmons approached with all the gravitas of someone who'd watched too many courtroom dramas. Sir, he began, you've been warned multiple times that this construction is in direct violation of HOA Code 7.3. You've failed to submit necessary documentation for landscape modification and have ignored compliance intervention. As of this morning, we are escalating this to a formal enforcement action. Is that right? I said, arms crossed. It is, he said, pulling out a thick white envelope and holding it out like a summons. This is your final notice. Failure to comply will result in legal penalties and mandatory property review. I didn't take the envelope. Karen stepped in, her voice too bright. We're trying to be reasonable here. We don't want this to turn into something larger. I turned to Mr. Simmons. Can I ask you something? He nodded, clipboard still out. Are you an attorney? No, he said. Law enforcement. He hesitated. No. Then, you don't have the authority to serve legal anything. And this, I tapped the envelope, is nothing more than a piece of paper with scary fonts on it. He blinked. Let's talk about your badge, I added, pointing to the gold HOA emblem on his shirt. You know impersonating a government official is a felony in this state. His jaw twitched. This isn't impersonation. This is private governance, Karen chimed in. You don't have the right to obstruct an HOA enforcement official. I raised an eyebrow. You're standing on my land, uninvited, for the second time. Karen opened her mouth, but I held up a hand. Let's make a few things clear for the record. First, this pond is under 500 square feet, which according to your own outdated HOA charter, doesn't require a permit. Second, the county inspector already signed off on the dig and runoff plan. Third, I have emails dating back 5 years that prove the HOA has never enforced this clause against any other homeowner. Mr. Simmons started to speak, but I kept going. And fourth, I said, turning slowly toward Karen as I explained yesterday, I am your landlord. Her eyes flared. I pulled a manila folder from my back pocket and opened it in front of everyone. Lease agreement, Unit 12B Aspen Ridge, signed by Karina Dupree. Witnessed, notarized, monthly rent paid through a holding account I own, which means effective immediately. I pulled out a second paper, a notice printed in bold red ink. You have 30 days to vacate the premises. Karen took a half step back. You're evicting me. I'm enforcing compliance, I said, stone-faced. Mr. Simmons cleared his throat. This has nothing to do with— Oh, but it does, I interrupted. You see, I also own the building your precious HOA office is renting. I checked the lease last night. You're 4 months into a 5-year term with an early termination clause I can trigger at will for misuse of premises or unlawful activity. Karen went pale. So let me ask you, I said, voice low and level, do you want to keep pressing me about a pond, or do you want to pack up your flyers and get off my land before I start calling real law enforcement? Nobody spoke. One of the compliance officers looked like he might bolt at any second. Mr. Simmons shifted his clipboard to his other hand like it might shield him. Karen's voice, when it returned, was brittle. You can't just— I can, I said. And I did. I dropped the envelope at her feet. Now leave. While you still can do it with your dignity halfway intact. They left, not with the drama of screeching tires or shouted threats, just quietly, awkwardly, their little parade falling apart one slow footstep at a time. When the last car was gone, I stood alone in the driveway, the sun warm on my face, and the shovel back in my hand. One more scoop, just for emphasis. The dirt gave way easy and soft, and I smiled. Because I wasn't just digging a pond, I was digging the grave for every ounce of false power they thought they had. 2 days passed. I spent them outside, shovel in hand, moving earth with a quiet steadiness I hadn't felt in years. There was something meditative about it. The scrape of metal into soil, the arc of a full spade, the slow transformation of raw land into something with form and intention. The pond began to take shape, a gentle oval tucked into the lower third of my lot, where the ground naturally sloped and the morning sun hit just right. Word traveled faster than I'd expected. By the third morning, I had 3 neighbors stop by, 2 to offer help, 1 to offer a cautious nod of support before rushing off with her dog. People were watching. The air had changed. Something long dormant in this neighborhood, a buried sense of curiosity, or maybe courage, had begun to stir. So naturally, Karen had to strike again. It was just before noon when I heard the knock. Not the firm, polite kind. No, this was a hammering, relentless staccato that practically dared the door to stand up to it. I wiped my hands, stepped through the house, and opened the front door to find Karen standing there, flanked by the same 2 compliance enforcers from before, though this time they looked less sure of themselves. Their uniforms were slightly different new patches sewn on fresh logos on the sleeves. They'd rebranded themselves. Now it said WAPT HOA Protection Division. I almost laughed. Karen, in contrast, looked dead serious. You've escalated this, she said before I could speak. We tried to handle it civilly. You made it personal. I leaned against the frame, arms crossed. By reminding you that I own the property you're squatting in. Her nostrils flared, but she didn't rise to the bait. Instead, she produced another envelope. This is a formal citation from the HOA Legal Committee. You are in violation of 8 counts of community disturbance, environmental disruption, and intentional intimidation of board officials. That's a lot of accusations, I said, not taking the envelope. She dropped it at my feet. We've also filed for an emergency injunction with the Community Standards Officer, she continued. And if you continue digging past today, you will be subject to citizen's arrest under subsection 4D of the HOA Emergency Charter. That made me pause. Did you just say citizen's arrest? Her chin lifted. You're leaving us no choice. You are undermining the community. You've threatened board members. You've weaponized property ownership. Karen, I said, stepping forward. If I wanted to weaponize ownership, you'd be packing boxes already. One of the enforcers spoke for the first time. Sir, we're authorized to restrain individuals who refuse to comply with board mandates in the presence of multiple witnesses. You try to lay a hand on me, I said, voice low now, and the only thing you'll be restraining is your regret when real law enforcement hauls you off my land. Karen's voice sharpened. This is your final warning. One more dig and we proceed. I stared at her. No smile, no fury. Just a long measured look. Then I stepped aside. See that back window, I asked. She glanced over my shoulder. I've got 2 federal employees inside monitoring everything happening on this property due to an ongoing investigation. They've been watching your little stunt since the second you pulled up. That wasn't true. Yet. But Karen didn't know that. Her confidence faltered just enough for me to press in. You think I bought this house and stopped there? I said. You think owning your lease and your office was the end of my reach? I leaned closer. I own the surveillance contract that covers this block. I own the easement rights behind your fence. I even own the parcel of land under your HOA's electrical panel, which, by the way, is wired illegally across 2 lots. She blinked. Silence. And then her face cracked. Just a flicker. Just long enough. You're bluffing. I pulled out my phone. Not to make a call, just to tap the screen and let her see the satellite image I'd queued up. 3 parcels, my name on each. Her jaw clenched. This isn't over. You're right, I said. It's not. Because tomorrow morning I'll be filing a restraining order against you for harassment, unlawful intimidation, and trespassing. Karen took a step back, her voice dropping to something almost venomous. This neighborhood will turn on you. You don't belong here. I've been here longer than you. I just don't shout about it on next door to all. The enforcers shuffled uncomfortably. One of them glanced at the gate as if already planning their exit. You've destroyed the fabric of this community, Karen snapped. No, I said quietly. I'm just digging a pond. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Without another word, she spun on her heel, motioned to her little HOA protection division, and stormed off down the front walk. I watched them go, calm as a stone, until their convoy disappeared back down the road. Then I turned, walked through the house, picked up my shovel, and headed straight back to the dig site. I planted my boots in the dirt, drew a slow breath, and lifted the next scoop of earth. And another. And another. Because if they thought intimidation could stop me, they'd have to learn the hard way. I dig deeper. That evening, I stood at the edge of the pond pit, watching the final light melt off the treetops like golden syrup. The hole was taking shape wide even, and framed in a natural slope. It would still need lining plumbing and a proper water source. But it was already a symbol, not just of resistance, but of belonging, of planting yourself in the dirt and saying, I will not be moved. I was tired, bone tired, but satisfied. Then my phone buzzed. It was a text from a number I hadn't used in years. Heard you're in a neighborhood war. Mind if I drop by tomorrow? Bring coffee. Signed. Dennis. Dennis Arnott. He'd been my tenant once, years ago, before I ever moved into this house. An attorney, quiet, sharp, the kind of guy who could slice through a lease with his words alone. After he moved out, we'd stayed loosely in touch. What I hadn't realized until recently, however, was that Dennis had taken a job with the State Division of Community Affairs, the office that regulated nonprofit residential governance boards like HOAs. I didn't need to reply with yes, he was already coming. The next morning, Dennis showed up with 2 cups of black coffee and a messenger bag that looked like it hadn't left his side since law school. We sat on the back porch overlooking the pond. So he said after a long sip, You finally pissed off the local paper tyrant. I smirked, just by digging. No such thing as just digging. When people think power is a flag they get to wave wherever they go. I explained everything, Karen, the compliance goons, the attempted arrest, the fake citations, the escalation tactics. Dennis didn't interrupt. He just listened, brows occasionally twitching as I ticked off each overreach. When I was done, he nodded slowly. She's not just pushing the envelope. She's burning it. She threatened a citizen's arrest. Dennis raised an eyebrow. HOA boards have 0 authority to detain anyone. They're not municipal bodies. They can levy fines if the bylaws are legally intact, but physical enforcement, he shook his head. That's a lawsuit waiting to happen. I leaned back. I already served her the lease termination, and the HOA office's building lease is next. Dennis grinned. You always were patient. Petty, I corrected, but thorough. He opened his bag, pulled out a folder, and slid it across the table. This is their original incorporation file from the county, he said. Filed 13 years ago under a boilerplate template. No amendments since. That's a red flag. Most functioning HOAs update their charters every few years. These folks haven't touched it. What's that mean for me? It means if you challenge them legally, they're standing on sand. Any judge worth their robe would toss half their complaints. I flipped through the pages. Here's the real kicker, Dennis continued. I cross-checked your name with the county's parcel database. You already know this, but the HOA building lease you inherited when you bought that commercial lot, it never got updated with a business use clause. They're technically operating as a corporate entity in a residential zoned lease. I blinked. That's a violation. 3 counts, he said. Want to shut them down? Serve them with a zoning enforcement complaint. It'll flag with the City Planning Commission. By the time they fix it, if they can fix it, they'll be buried in code violations. I exhaled. You know what I like about you, Dennis? I don't smile when I bury people. I laughed. No, I said. You smile afterward. We spent the next few hours drafting formal notice letters. Dennis had the language of subtle vengeance down to a science. Nothing rude, nothing crude, just sentences so sharp they'd leave paper cuts across egos. He also helped me file a public notice of property use, formally listing the pond as part of an approved permaculture project. That single page, signed and notarized, made it illegal for the HOA to interfere without risking charges of environmental obstruction. We faxed 1 copy to the county clerk, emailed another to the HOA's public inbox, and taped a 3rd to my front door right under the brass number plate. At sunset, Dennis left with a wink and a promise to check in after the fallout. But the real storm came the following morning. Karen was back, alone this time. No SUV, no clipboard. Just her standing at the edge of the dig site like someone surveying a battlefield after a failed campaign. I saw her from the kitchen window. She hadn't knocked, hadn't called. She just stood there staring at the pond like it had personally betrayed her. I stepped out. She didn't turn. Are you proud of this? She said quietly. Of embarrassing people. I folded my arms. I'm proud of defending what's mine. This neighborhood used to have standards, she muttered, and now it has freedom. She turned to me then. Her eyes weren't furious anymore. They were something else. Wounded, maybe, or just small. You had no right to embarrass me, she whispered. I paused. You had no right, I said, to threaten me, to try and arrest me, to intimidate your neighbors, and you definitely had no right to build an empire on rules you barely understand. I was trying to preserve the community. No, I said, you were trying to control it. She looked like she might say something else, but she didn't. She just nodded once and walked away. No threats, no parting shots, just footsteps in the dirt. That afternoon, I hand-delivered the final notice to the HOA office. The receptionist, young, clearly overwhelmed, accepted it without a word. She looked at the envelope at the name on the sender line and blinked hard. You're the landlord? I am. She hesitated. So this is real? I nodded. You have 2 weeks to vacate. I've waived early penalties, but the building's being reclaimed. She whispered, thank God. I left without another word. By dusk, I was back in the pond, watching the still water begin to collect along the bottom of the slope. The liner was down. The trench was sealed. It would take time, but it was happening. And this time, no one would stop it. The next morning, the office door on Main Street bore a new sign. White paper, black letters, simple and absolute. Notice of termination. Pursuant to Section 6B of the lease agreement, dated August 3, 2017, this property must be vacated by the HOA board and its affiliates within 14 days of receipt of this notice. Property owner. I stood across the street with a thermos in one hand and Dennis's neatly collated copy of the lease in the other. A couple of early risers walked by and gave me curious looks, but didn't stop. Willow Bend wasn't the kind of town where people inserted themselves into anything with legal paper on it unless it involved free coffee or fresh-baked muffins. Inside the office, I could see movement behind the blinds. Karen was in there, of course. Her silhouette as rigid as I remembered, pacing behind her desk like a cat circling a shrinking cage. I took a long breath and walked in. The door chimed cheerfully, like this was a neighborhood florist and not the headquarters of suburban tyranny. A young woman behind the front desk jumped slightly, recognizing me instantly. Her eyes darted to Karen's office, then back to me. Mr. Langston, she said cautiously. She's in a meeting. She's in a lease violation, I said with a quiet smile. I'll wait. I sat in the small reception area beneath a frame print of HOA vision and values, which felt more ironic by the second. Karen emerged a moment later, her composure visibly cracking. She wore a navy pantsuit that looked pressed and perfect from a distance. But up close, you could see the faint wrinkles near the shoulders, the uneven hem where she'd probably stepped on it getting dressed. Her clipboard was gone. So was her usual tone. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "I believe the notice on your door answers that," I replied. She glanced at the receptionist, probably hoping for some backup, but the young woman quickly pretended to be answering an urgent email. "You're abusing your power," Karen said tightly. I gave her a long, measured look. "You really want to have that conversation with me, Karen?" She flushed. "Let's walk through a few things." I continued standing. "You're 4 months into a 5-year commercial lease. Section 6B allows the property owner to terminate that lease with 14 days' notice if the premises are used in any way that contributes to legal harassment, unlawful activity, or violates local zoning ordinances. You've accomplished all 3 in under a week." She tried to interrupt, but I kept going. "You orchestrated an unauthorized attempt at detaining a homeowner. You issued fake citations with no legal precedent. You showed up on private property with faux enforcement officers dressed like tactical cosplayers. And you've harassed multiple neighbors into silence over minor landscaping decisions." "I was doing my job," she snapped. "No, Karen," I said, stepping closer. "You were playing queen in a neighborhood of pawns, and I'm the one who owns the board." She swallowed. Behind me, I heard the receptionist exhale audibly. Karen's voice dropped. "You can't just dismantle a functioning HOA." "I'm not," I said. "The homeowners are." Her eyes widened. "What?" I pulled a second document from the folder, this one notarized, signed by 12 residents, all of whom held voting rights within the community. "Motion for emergency dissolution of the current board due to breach of fiduciary duty, unethical conduct, and intimidation of members. Filed yesterday. Legally backed by state code and sent to the Department of Residential Governance. Once they review the complaint, your charter will be suspended pending investigation. And you," I added, "will be asked to step down." Her mouth opened, then closed. I handed her the document. She stared at it like it might catch fire in her hands. "You're enjoying this," she said bitterly. I shook my head. "Not one bit. I never wanted a war. I wanted a pond." I turned toward the door. "But now," I added without turning back, "I want my neighborhood back." That evening, I received a letter. Not from Karen, from the state. It was confirmation that the complaint had been received, reviewed, and fast-tracked. A provisional order had been issued, placing the HOA board in administrative suspension. All activity fines citations meetings were to cease immediately until further notice. It was more than I'd expected, but the real victory came quietly. The next morning, I woke to the sound of movement in the cul-de-sac. Not chaos, not confrontation, just movement. Neighbors talking. Hedges being trimmed without fear of citations. A small welcome banner being put up on the porch of the Parkers, who had nearly sold their house 6 months prior out of pure exhaustion from Karen's weekly warnings about their excessive wind chimes. And me, I went back to digging, with no interruptions, no threats, no clipboards, just dirt sweat and the slow carving of something honest into the ground. By midday, the liner was fully set. I'd started filling it with water from the gravity-fed pump Dennis helped me rig from the nearby creek. A few koi were already in the tank waiting to be introduced. It would take a few more days for the plants to settle the water to balance, but it was mine. Built not with permission, but with principle. As the sun dipped behind the trees, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned, half expecting another last-ditch confrontation. It was Karen, alone. No blazer, no clipboard. Just her in jeans and a windbreaker holding a cardboard box. She didn't say anything, just set the box down near the pond's edge. "I'm moving out next week," she said quietly. "Didn't want to leave anything behind." I nodded slowly. Understood. I may have gone too far. I didn't respond. She looked down at the pond. "It's nice." I let that hang there for a moment. Then, "It's peaceful." She nodded, then turned to leave. And I let her go. Not because she deserved forgiveness, but because I didn't need revenge. The water in the pond shimmered as she walked away, catching the last light of day. The morning I served the final notices, the neighborhood was already humming with whispers. Word had gotten out faster than I thought it would. Maybe it was the state suspension order making the rounds in HOA Facebook groups. Maybe it was the printed eviction notice someone taped to the HOA office window and posted online, complete with a caption that simply read, "Turns out the king lives in the castle." Either way, when I stepped outside with a stack of certified documents in my hand, people were already watching. I didn't dress for war. I wore the same jeans and work boots I always wore when digging the pond, and a plain blue t-shirt that still smelled like pine dust. No blazer, no shades, just a man with paperwork and a mission. I made my way to 3 places that morning. The first was the HOA office. It was quieter than usual. No Karen, no staff. Just the young receptionist, Marcy, sitting alone behind the counter with a single orchid and a box of paper clips on her desk. She looked up and smiled tentatively. "I was expecting you," she said, standing. "I won't be long," I replied, offering her a calm nod. She took the envelope without hesitation. I slid a second copy onto the front desk for Karen. "You don't have to stay," I added. "Lease terminates in 12 days, but you can pack early. No penalties." She blinked. "I was only here because I needed the hours." "You'll find better," I said. "Promise." She gave me a look, half grateful, half relieved. The second stop was Karen's rented bungalow. I could have mailed it. Could have left it taped to her door like she'd done to so many others. But I didn't want to play her game. I wanted the moment to land clearly, cleanly. She wasn't home, which was fine. I slid the envelope into her mailbox and placed a second one marked, "Personal, open immediately." On her front porch, weighed down by a small ceramic frog I found near the garden path. It had chipped paint and a crooked smile. Seemed fitting. The third stop, the community board. It was just a wooden kiosk near the park, 4 feet wide, covered in plastic sleeves, where residents posted yard sale flyers and babysitter requests. I pinned up 2 documents. One was the official state suspension order. The other was a copy of the new vote proposal, an open call for board re-election once the dust settled, open to any resident with clean dues, and a desire to serve with integrity. It was time to rebuild. Later that afternoon, Dennis came by again, this time with a bag of fish food and a grin wide enough to hang laundry from. "She's been calling the city zoning office all morning," he said, setting the bag down on my porch rail. "Asked if she could challenge the pond permit. They transferred her. Guess who she ended up speaking to?" "Not you," I said, already smiling. "Oh no." "Worse," he chuckled. "My boss, who drafted the enforcement memo." I laughed out loud for the first time in days. "She hung up mid-sentence," he added. We stood together by the pond, tossing a few flakes into the water, where it had begun to pool with rain runoff. A pair of koi hovered near the center tails, flicking lazily. "She'll be gone soon," I said quietly. Dennis nodded. "She was already gone, just didn't know it yet." He handed me another folder, slimmer than the last. "This one's yours. Final ownership filings. HOA building lease, public easement, reversal pond classification records, all sealed and notarized." I accepted it, not because I needed the reassurance, but because having it in hand made the victory real. "Anything left to do?" I asked. "One thing," Dennis said, smirking. "You still haven't told the HOA they're officially trespassing if they use the office space after next week." I figured the locks might send that message. He laughed. "True." That evening, I sat on my back porch with a beer in hand and a long view of the pond glimmering under the rising moon. The air was thick with crickets and the soft splash of water finding its place. Peace had a texture I'd forgotten, heavy and warm and absolutely quiet. But then headlights. A car pulled up at the front of my drive. Not fast, not aggressive, just steady. I stood, curiosity rising, and made my way around to the front yard. "Karen!" She was behind the wheel of her silver SUV, the engine still running, the window half down. She didn't get out. I didn't wave. We stood there, her in the car, me at the top of the gravel path, for a long moment. "I got the notice," she finally said. I nodded. "Didn't think you'd actually go through with it." "You underestimated me," I replied simply. Her jaw clenched. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone," she said. "No," I agreed. "You were trying to control them. That's worse." She looked away. "I never wanted this to become personal," she said after a pause. I stepped closer, stopping just out of reach of the headlights. "You tried to arrest me on my land for digging a pond." "It wasn't about the pond," she said. "It was about the principle." "That's exactly the problem." She looked up. "You made the rules about you and forgot they're supposed to serve the people who live here." Another pause. Then quietly, "What happens now?" I considered her for a long moment. "You move," I said. "The board dissolves, the office closes, and the community heals." She nodded once, slowly. Then she shifted the car into reverse and backed out of the drive. No shouting, no threats, just departure. I slept like a stone that night. And in the morning, for the first time since the first shovel of dirt, I dug with no one watching. No Karen, no enforcers, no fake citations, just me, a sky full of blue, and the kind of silence that only comes after you've earned it. The notices had been served. The board had been broken, and the water was rising. It wasn't supposed to be a dramatic event. Just a scheduled HOA board meeting in the town's rented event hall, a beige, windowless room behind the library with folding chairs, a coffee urn that hadn't been cleaned since the Obama administration, and a creaky lectern that wobbled whenever someone leaned on it too hard. But that night it was standing room only. They came in quietly, couples, retirees, tired working parents in polos and denim, each clutching a crumpled copy of the state suspension order or the community notice I'd posted at the kiosk. The chatter was muted, hushed. People weren't just curious, they were ready. When I walked in, heads turned. Some nodded, some smiled. A few patted my shoulder like I'd done something brave, though all I'd really done was not back down. At the front of the room, Karen was already seated. To her right sat two remaining board members, Mrs. Claxton, who once tried to ban wind chimes on the grounds of sonic clutter, and Gerald, a man whose greatest contribution to the HOA was a strongly worded email about children chalking on sidewalks. Karen wore her navy suit, again clipboard in hand, but she looked smaller now. No microphone, no gavel. Just that same smug air of control she'd always carried, except this time it was leaking at the edges. The meeting began on time, technically, but it didn't really begin until Diane Graves stood up. Diane was a former treasurer, voted off the board after questioning 3 months of missing expenditures. That was 2 years ago. She hadn't said a word in public since. Tonight she walked calmly to the front, her heels sharp against the tile, and dropped a thick binder onto the table in front of Karen with a thud that echoed across the room. I'd like to start tonight by presenting documented evidence of financial mismanagement, procedural violations, and abuse of authority by this board, she said, her voice steady, clear. Karen blinked. This isn't your place. Diane held up a copy of the state directive. It is now. Applause. Actual applause. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Then Gerald, of all people, stood. I move for a vote of no confidence, he said. Karen whipped toward him, eyes wide. You can't be serious. He didn't look at her. This has gone too far. A second later, someone else called out, seconded. And just like that, the floor opened. One by one, neighbors stood, told their stories. The Smiths, who had been fined for excessive nightlight spill because their porch bulb was too bright. Marcia, a schoolteacher, who stopped hosting her weekly book club after receiving a warning about congregational traffic patterns. An elderly couple who had been denied a variance for a handrail until Karen personally inspected their back steps and declared their mobility issue insufficient cause. And me, I waited, watched, let it build. Then when the silence finally landed between stories, I stood. I don't have a story, I said. You've all seen mine unfold over the past month. I just have a reminder. I held up a copy of the original HOA charter, the one Dennis and I had pulled from county records. This board exists to serve this community, not to rule it, not to intimidate it, not to profit from it. I looked straight at Karen. You forgot that. All of you forgot that. I stepped forward, handed the charter to Diane, and returned to my seat. Karen tried one last time. Tried to regain control with some muddled explanation about structure precedent and how I was manipulating people with property leverage. But it was over. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. 37 in favor of dissolving the current board. 2 abstentions. 0 against. Karen's face was unreadable. Red, tight. Her knuckles white on the edge of the table. She stood slowly, gathered her clipboard, and walked out without a word. Nobody stopped her. Nobody followed. In the days that followed, the neighborhood felt different. Not louder, not wilder, just looser. Like everyone had unclenched something deep inside them. The HOA office was vacated within a week. Marcy, the receptionist, dropped off the keys at my porch in a small padded envelope with a sticky note that read, "Thanks for seeing what the rest of us couldn't say." The locks were changed the next day. The office converted into a shared workspace for local freelancers and a drop-in tutoring center for kids during summer months. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Diane stepped up as interim chair of the transition committee. Not an HOA, not yet. Just a group of neighbors figuring out how to be neighbors again. I showed up to the first meeting out of curiosity more than anything. But when I arrived, they handed me a folding chair, a plate of brownies, and a form asking what I thought needed fixing in the neighborhood. Not enforcing. Fixing. That's when I knew things had truly changed. The next morning, I stood at the edge of my pond and watched the koi circle under the glassy surface tails, fanning like brushstrokes in slow motion. The water was clearer than I expected, filtered through gravel and quiet time, and just enough sunlight. The rocks had settled. So had I. Karen hadn't been seen since the vote. Word was she moved back to her sister's place in Fairview. A rumor floated around that she was trying to join another HOA this time. As a member, not a leader, but had been rejected after someone Googled her name. I didn't gloat, didn't smile, didn't care. I just picked up a small rock, skipped it across the pond, and watched the ripples fade into peace. The sky was overcast that morning, as if even nature itself had decided it was time for a change. I stood on the porch of my cabin, coffee mug in hand, watching as the first of the HOA's moving vans pulled up to the front of the old office. The building had once represented a symbol of authority, intimidation even. Now it was just another structure with a lease terminated and power turned off. They were here to vacate. Karen didn't show up at first. A few board members and their assistants did. Faces I'd seen many times at HOA meetings, the ones who used to smirk when handing out violation slips, now walking briskly with cardboard boxes and plastic storage bins in their arms. I didn't interrupt. I didn't offer to help. I just watched. Every few minutes, someone would glance over toward me, standing there calm and quiet, no longer the man they thought they could push. The silence between us said everything. They knew now. I wasn't just some homeowner with a shovel. I was the landlord who pulled the floor out from under them. At around 10:30, a dark blue SUV pulled up. Out stepped Karen. She was dressed sharply, as always. Navy jacket heels, slightly too high for gravel hair, pinned into the same exact bun. But her steps weren't sharp anymore. She walked like someone carrying the full weight of consequences. I didn't move. She didn't speak. Karen walked past me with a short glance, lips tight, clutching a set of keys and a folder. She disappeared into the building with the others. It was quiet for most of the afternoon. Just the sound of car doors slamming, tape being ripped from rolls, and the occasional clatter of file drawers being emptied. A few neighbors passed by, slowly whispering to one another, catching glimpses of what was happening. One older man on a morning walk raised his thumb toward me and said, "'Bout damn time." By 3 o'clock, the furniture was gone. Signs were pulled down. The metal HOA Compliance Center plaque that once hung beside the door had been yanked off, leaving 4 empty screw holes behind like scars. Karen came out last. She held a small box in both arms and paused in the doorway. For a moment, she looked around the neighborhood at the houses, the trees, the gravel road winding past the park, and I wondered if she realized how far she'd fallen. From the queen of the cul-de-sac to a woman evicted by the very man she tried to destroy. Then she looked at me. There was no fight in her eyes this time, no smirk, no entitlement, just silence. She walked to her SUV, loaded the box, and shut the trunk with a single echoing thud. The car pulled away without a sound. No honk, no wave, not even a look back. Just like that, she was gone. Later that evening, I unlocked the front door to the old office building. It still smelled faintly of toner and stale coffee, but the air was lighter somehow. I walked the halls, slowly turning off lights one by one until I reached the central meeting room. The whiteboard was blank, the bulletin board empty. In the center of the room, a lone chair had been left behind. I pulled it out, sat down, and let the quiet wrap around me. My boots rested on the same floor that once echoed with Karen's sharp heels. And now all that was left was the sound of wind through the open window. A knock on the frame startled me. It was Dennis. "You good?" he asked. I nodded. "She's really gone," he added, like he needed to hear it aloud. "Office closed, lease terminated, end of the era." I said, then added, "Good riddance." Dennis chuckled and dropped a 6-pack of root beer onto the table. "So what now? You thinking of keeping the space?" I looked around. Maybe. Could be something useful again. Community center, co-op. A place for people to come together, not tear each other down. I liked that he said, popping a bottle cap and raising it toward me. "To peace and ponds." We clinked glass. The air smelled like freedom. The first dragonfly appeared on a Thursday. It hovered just above the water, its gossamer wings catching the sunlight as it darted back and forth like it was testing its claim. I watched from my lawn chair, boots off, toes sunk into the warm dirt. The pond, my pond, was finally complete. After all the drama, the hearings, the threats, and that final satisfying closure of the HOA office, I had done what I set out to do. Dig a pond. Not a political act, not a statement. Just a simple hole in the earth filled with clean water, stones, life, and peace. But it had become something else now. A symbol, a gathering place, a reclaiming of space, not just physical, but emotional. The HOA had taken so much air from our neighborhood over the years that most of us didn't even realize we were holding our breath. Now we were exhaling. That weekend, the neighborhood came alive in a way I hadn't seen in years. It started with just a few folks. Diane and her teenage son brought over a folding table and a couple coolers of lemonade. Dennis showed up in his old straw hat carrying a fishing pole and a bag of tortilla chips. Then came the Walkers from 3 houses down, their toddler dragging a plastic duck float behind him. I didn't invite anyone. I didn't need to. They came because something was different. We didn't call it a party. There were no flyers or posted signs. No checklists or permits, just people. Laughter. Folding chairs and barefoot kids and dogs lying in the shade. The old radio played Johnny Cash through a Bluetooth speaker and someone set up a portable grill. I sat back and watched. Neighbors who hadn't spoken in years were sharing plates of food. Older folks waved from their porches. Teenagers tossed a football. Even the grumpiest guy on the block, Mr. Lowry, the one who used to file noise complaints, walked over with a plate of ribs and a paper napkin tucked into his collar. Never thought I'd see the day, he muttered, sitting beside me. No Karen, no fines, just folks being folks. I smiled. Told you all I wanted was to dig a pond. He chuckled. You dug a lot more than that. The sun began to dip, turning the sky golden and soft. The water shimmered. Someone had brought tiki torches, and their flames flickered like whispers along the edge of the yard. I noticed kids dipping their toes in the shallows, squealing at the fish that darted close to their ankles. That was when one of the younger moms, Stephanie, I think, approached with a plastic tray. These are from all of us, she said, handing me a stack of homemade cards. Crayon drawings of ponds and trees, scribbled notes like, "Thank you for being brave," and "We love your fishies." I felt my throat tighten. I didn't do it for thanks, I said softly. She smiled. We know. That's why it means more. A few minutes later, someone began to clap. Just one person at first, then a few more. It wasn't loud or showy. Just steady. Real. A neighborly ripple of appreciation, not for some grand speech or official announcement, but for the quiet kind of resistance that had changed everything. Late that night, when the last of the coolers were packed and the lawn chairs folded, I stood at the edge of the pond with Dennis. You ever think it would end like this? He asked. I didn't think about the end, I replied. I just knew I couldn't let someone tell me I couldn't dig a hole on my own land. He nodded. That's the kind of thinking that built this country. I looked up at the stars reflected on the surface of the water, and the kind that'll keep it standing. We stood in silence. Not the heavy kind that came from fear. The good kind. The kind that follows justice. The kind that comes after the noise. After the fight, after the office is closed, and the people return to being just neighbors again. Behind me, I could still hear the faint sound of someone playing a harmonica. Off key, maybe. But honest. The pond was done. The people were free. And for the first time in years, this neighborhood didn't belong to paperwork or power plays or people who mistook authority for ownership. It belonged to us. There's something sacred about silence after a storm. Not the silence of retreat or tension or waiting for the next shoe to drop, but the kind that settles over a place when things are finally right. Not perfect, not without scars, but aligned. That's what I felt every morning when I stepped out onto my porch and saw the pond still and clear under the waking sky. My days found rhythm again. Coffee before sunrise. A short walk along the edge of the pond with my boots kicking up the dew. Feeding the fish. Saying hello to neighbors as they passed, many of whom I hadn't spoken to in years before the Karen era imploded. One afternoon, I was planting hydrangeas near the pond's northern curve when a small boy, no more than 6 or 7, walked up and stood beside me. He didn't say a word at first, just watched. Want to help? I asked, handing him the trowel. He nodded solemnly, crouched beside me, and began scooping soil like it was his mission from God. After a few minutes, he asked, "Is this your pond?" I guess you could say that. My mom said you're the guy who beat the bossy lady. I paused, then smiled. I didn't beat her. I just reminded everyone she wasn't the boss. He looked at me eyes wide as if I'd said something profound. Maybe I had. He shrugged and kept digging. When we were done, I patted down the soil around the new plant and said, "Thanks, partner." He grinned. "Can I come fish here sometime?" "This pond belongs to everyone now," I said, "as long as you treat it right." He ran off hollering for his sister. I sat back and exhaled. That was all I'd ever wanted. Not domination, not applause, just the right to live peacefully. To create something that brought joy. To defend what I had without needing to yell. The old HOA never understood that. They thought power came from policies, from fines and threats and papers on clipboards. But real power is quieter. It's dignity. Community. A pond you can sit beside without looking over your shoulder. A few weeks later, I threw a small get-together. Nothing fancy. Just some close neighbors' hot dogs on the grill and a few plastic tables under the shade trees. We toasted with lemonade and root beer. Someone brought a homemade cake that read "Happy Pond Day." Dennis made a toast halfway through, half sincere, half sarcastic, and everyone laughed until they cried. "Here's to men with shovels and women who train federal agents," he joked. That earned a roar of applause, especially for my wife, who raised her glass higher than anyone. Yes, she was here now. We'd weathered a lot together and apart. But this strange battle over a pond had become a shared triumph. It reminded us of who we were before the world tried to box us into roles: wife, husband, neighbor, enemy. We were just people who refused to be pushed. That night, we sat on lawn chairs, under the stars, listening to frogs croak and fish splash. A few neighbors stayed late, quietly lingering, not wanting the night to end. Eventually, it was just me and her. She reached over and took my hand. "You know," she said, "I never imagined this is how we'd find peace." I squeezed her fingers. "Sometimes you have to dig through a lot of dirt to find the clean water." She laughed. "That's going on a t-shirt." The cabin is quiet now. The war is over. Karen has moved out of the neighborhood, I heard. The old HOA office still stands, but now it's a community space used for craft fairs, potlucks, and the occasional piano recital from Diane's son. The board was restructured into something voluntary and kind. There are still rules, of course, but they're agreed upon, not imposed. They serve us, not the other way around. As for me, I dig when I want to. I fish when I feel like it. And I sit with people not above them, not beneath them, just beside them. We talk about tomatoes, about the weather, about grandkids and gutters, and how the koi are finally breeding. The fight feels far away now, but I haven't forgotten. I remember what it cost, what it revealed, what it healed. And I know this: sometimes justice doesn't look like a courtroom or a headline. Sometimes it looks like a quiet pond and a boy with a fishing pole.